how do we as people relate to God? And so he helps us out in telling us how the two of us relate, and that's what I'd like to go through this quarter. Relating to God, how can a great big God relate to little old me? We are not the first people to wonder about this question. This has gone through people's minds, I'm sure, for centuries and millennia. In fact, there's a poem that we have sung before. You might recognize this. O Savior, as my eyes behold the wonders of thy might untold, the heavens in glorious light arrayed, the vast creation thou hast made. You're so huge, you're so vast, you're so powerful, you're so omnipotent, you're so majestic. And yet, to think that thou lovest me. My heart cries out, how can it be? How can it be? How can it be that God should love a soul like me? Oh, how can it be? It just doesn't make any sense. Why would the master of the universe, creator of all the galaxies and stars and space and world, even consider such a small, tiny little creature like myself? And even if he considers me and acknowledges me, which is in itself is surprising, why and how would he actually want to relate to and have any kind of relationship with me? I mean, do I walk along the sidewalk in the summer and look down at a little ant on the ground and say, wow, I'd really like to get to know that ant? I mean, it sounds a little bizarre, but in reality, is that not kind of the same picture as God wanting to relate to us? This little dirt ball of a planet that we call Earth. And yeah, he created us, and I understand all that, but we're little tiny things. Why would he want to pay attention to us? It's really a mystery, and it's really strange. God is nothing like us. I mean, that's not exactly true, is it? We are made in his image. I want to get that straight. But he is holy, he's righteous, he's just, he's loving, merciful, forgiving, not to mention all-powerful, all-present, all-knowing, all-eternal. He created the universe simply by speaking it. And he can end it the same way. How can we as puny, wicked little people relate to a God like that? Or to be more accurate, how and why does a God like that relate to puny, wicked people like us? I mean, left to ourselves, we couldn't relate to God at all, right? If God created everything and stepped back and said, here you go, guys, come and find me, we'd be hopeless. We would have no way of getting to know him or reaching out to him in any way. He has to be the one to initiate down to us. I'm trying to think of a good example, and it's hard for me to do. I guess if you've had kids or raised kids, right, and you have a little 2-year-old and you want to spend time and play with them, they cannot relate to you on an adult level, right? You can't talk politics and work and job and economics and stuff like that to the 2-year-old. And so if it's up to the 2-year-old to get to know you, there will be no relationship. You have to condescend and reach down and speak to them on their level. And we do goofy little things, you know, things to make them laugh and talk about cartoons and Mickey Mouse and whatever else it is you talk about. You have to reach down and speak to them on their level, not the other way around, or else it'll never happen. Think of that maybe as an illustration of us and God, right? There's no way we can come up to his level and relate. There just isn't. He's got to be the one to initiate and come down and baby talk to us, to speak to us if there's going to be any relationship whatsoever. This can be, oh, by the way, I tried to find a picture of a guy who's really thinking and deep in contemplation, and this is what I come up with. So this guy's name is Arthur Schopenhauer. I don't really care who he is. He's just a fun picture to look at. Having said that, coincidentally, I looked up who this guy was just to make sure I wasn't putting the picture of somebody really bad up without my knowing it. I've gotten myself in trouble that way before. He actually is a German philosopher who is a non-God believer, apparently. I didn't read a ton on him, but just a little biopsis. Apparently, he believed, and his philosophy was that the universe is basically an irrational and nonsensical place, that people have a miserable little existence, and the best that we can do for ourselves is try to live in a benevolent and kind way to make our sad little existence a more tolerable place to live while we're here in this life. Isn't that sad? And isn't that kind of I don't know if it was coincidental, but isn't it almost fitting that I should end up with his picture up here? Because that's really kind of the question that we're asking about, isn't it? How do we relate to God and give more meaning than our miserable little life here? So I thought that was fascinating. So there's Arthur for you, but we don't care who he is. He's just a fun picture. We're going to continue. This question of relating to God, it can be such an overwhelming question that some people believe that we can't and don't relate to God at all. These people are called, does anyone know what these people might be called? God is out there and we can't even relate to him. There's no way to get to know him whatsoever. That would be called a deist, right? A deist. If you're a deist, that's what you believe. God is all-powerful. He's the creator of the universe, but we're just little tiny bugs on a planet. There's no way we can get to know him. So he created everything. He kind of stepped away and watched his universe run. And that's the extent of it. I want to click on this description here, if I can turn my page. Deism is the belief in the existence of a supreme being, specifically a creator who does not intervene in the universe. You've probably heard of the Clockmaker Theory before, maybe, right? God created the universe and he wound everything up to run in a certain way in an orderly fashion. You know, the sun and the moon, the stars and rotation, all that stuff. He created it and then he sat back to watch his creation run in all of its grand glory. Could he have done that if he wanted to? Absolutely. He's God. He can do what he wants. But he didn't stop there. But if you believe this, you're a deist. I have a couple quotes from earlier writers. This is from Thomas Paine, an early American writer. He said, "The deist needs none of those tricks and shows called miracles to confirm his faith. For what can be a greater miracle than the creation itself and his own existence? I don't need any of those miracles or interventions or anything sparkly like that. All the proof I need to know of God is just in the creation and my own existence." Is that true? Oh, I love it when that happens. I see some people if you're live streaming, you can't see what I see, but I see some heads going like this, and I see some heads going like this. That's what I love. That's when I know people are starting to think about what I said. Is this true? Technically, what he said probably would say is true. Now, is that the whole story? No, it's not. But look at the creation. Look at the power and the order and the ingenuity that goes into everything we see, not just the sun, moon, and stars. We talk about biotechnology, right? And we're a technological age now, and we like to create new things. The most advanced biotechnological contraption on the universe is sitting right here in this auditorium, right? Each one of us. Look at the design and the complexity of each one of us. From the eyes to the muscles to the nervous system to the brain. Everything is so enormously complex. There's nothing that we as humans can create that comes even close to the complexity. Just look at the creation that God has made. So he says, the deist, which we in here I hope are not, he says, all I need to believe in the creation of, the existence of a creator is my own existence and the universe around us. Does the Bible, by the way, confirm that? Psalms 19. Yeah, he says the heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament show his handiwork. Look around you. If you know nothing else about God, but you can look around with your eyeballs, you should be able to determine that there is a creator. Now, I realize in these modern days we've gotten a little bit dumber maybe, because these days we look around and say, oh, look, it all happened by... Yeah, so we've kind of come down a little bit, haven't we? It all happened by chance. It's all evolution. Well, sorry, that's not possible. It can't just happen. It's too complex. But the deist says, no, I don't need any miracles. I don't need any intervention. I don't need any holy writings or anything like that. All I need is the universe to show me that there is a God. This quote here, Benjamin Franklin, and I didn't confirm which writing this is. I hope this is accurate. I got this off of a quotes page on the internet, so if this is not accurate, I'm sorry, but as far as I know it is. He says, I cannot conceive otherwise than that he, the infinite Father, expects or requires no worship or praise from us, but that he is even infinitely above it. God is so great and magnificent, there's no way he could have any interest in our praise or adoration because he's too big. It does nothing for him. Is that true? Partially yes, partially no, right? I mean, he doesn't need our praise or our adoration at all. He is self-sufficient. He needs nothing. Now, does he expect and want it? Yes, of course he does. We know that. So he's half right and half wrong here. But again, this is kind of the deist view. He says, God is so great that he doesn't need or even want our interaction at all in any way. Here's a summary of what they would believe. Fundamental beliefs of deism. It says, deism is a religious philosophy and movement that became prominent in England, France, and the United States in the 17th century. Deists typically reject supernatural events like prophecy and miracles and divine revelation, prominent in organized religion. along with the holy books and revealed religions that assert the existence of such things. In other words, they don't want any scriptures, they don't want any prophets, they don't want any miracles, they don't want anything, any interpersonal relationship with this God. Instead, deists hold that correct religion's beliefs must be founded on human reason, and that observed features of the natural world, and that these sources lead to the belief in the existence of one God or supreme being. We don't want any of that religious gobbledygook. We just want to look around and rationalize and reason our way into a belief of God. They are not correct. Having said that, picturing where they came from and what they saw, they saw back in the 18th century a Europe where the church and the state were one, or there was corruption within the church. Think the Catholic Church in Rome. Think of the English Church and the Anglican system, where the church has got a lot of corruption in it. There's a lot of mysteries and nonsense, and whenever they come across something they can't understand, they chalk it up to a mystery of the church or a mystery of God, and how does the communion become the blood and body of Christ physically? Well, it's a mystery of God how that happens. A lot of mysteries, a lot of unexplained things. And they say, all right, enough of this superstitious nonsense. We are going to rationalize our way to God. Well, superstition is on one end of the spectrum, and it's not right. Complete rejection of any kind of supernatural revelation is clear on the other side of the spectrum, and that's not right either. But that's what they said. Now, this class is not a study of deism. I just wanted to present that to kind of remind us of the enormity of this question, how can we relate to God? And there's a lot of people who say simply that we can't. It's too big of a hurdle to overcome. We cannot relate to the Creator God. So deism, question, is this a logical belief system? The deist perspective. Is it logical? Think about the question. Is it a logical belief system? I would submit the answer is yes, it is logical. Look around, reason, and that brings you to the conclusion that there is a God. That's all the deist says. The only problem is that there's more to the equation than that, isn't there? Now, based on reason and the created universe alone, the deist belief is a very rational one. But while that is a logical view, it is not a biblical one. The deists have overlooked one very important source of information, that would be the Bible. If they reject the Bible and all they look at is creation, and they use reason, they come to the conclusion there's a creator. Good, and they're correct. But there's more than that. God did give us a Bible, a book. God has given us a book that describes how he loves and interacts and rescues us. He tells us who he is and who we are and what he's done to bridge that gap. And as a way of helping us to understand the nature of the relationship between him and us, God uses our relationships with each other as a comparison. Remember I told you before about the toddler and the parent, right? How the toddler has to reach down to the parent. This is how God reaches down to us. And yes, if you reject the Bible and say, I don't want to believe in anything except for the creation, the deist view is a rational one. But God has provided us a book. And in that book, he tells us who he is. And he tells us how he relates down to us. God describes how he relates to us using a number of human-to-human relationships as our examples of our relationship with him. And I want to, how do I illustrate this in a good way to introduce it? If you're trying to describe something to someone who has no idea what they're talking about, how many of you have ever eaten something called Nutella? Nutella, right? You don't have to raise it super high, but kind of in an embarrassed sort of way, raise your hand like this. Yeah, okay, good, okay. Now, for those of you who have not ever eaten Nutella, how do I describe what it is to you? It's, does anybody have a good help me out here? Somebody that has eaten Nutella. I need to describe it to these poor folks who have not. I'm not a huge fan of it myself, but we need to describe it to these people. Did I hear something? No? Nobody wants to say it? Yes, thank you.
It's chocolate, runny chocolate, with some hazelnut butter mixed in.
Oh, very good. It's like, she said, it's like chocolate. It's like runny chocolate, isn't that what you said? With hazelnut butter mixed in, okay? It's like a chocolate, which, it's got chocolate in it, so it's like a chocolate, kind of a spready thing. Think almost like a peanut buttery consistency, like peanut butter, right? Think of a really chocolatey peanut butter, except for it's not peanut butter, it's hazelnut butter, okay? If you take the peanut out of peanut butter, stick in hazelnuts, right? Mix a bunch of chocolate with it, swirl it all around, you've got Nutella, right? Now, as a means of describing Nutella to you poor unfortunate people who have never tried it, what we've done is we've just drawn comparison. We've said it is like chocolate, it is like peanut butter, it is like a spread that you put on bread or toast or just stick in your mouth or whatever you do. How have we described Nutella to these people? We've drawn comparisons to something they do know, hopefully, what they're like. Hopefully you know what chocolate is, right? Everybody knows what chocolate is. Hopefully you know what peanut butter is. It's been around a long time. And so we take something that you might not know and compare it to something that you do know in hopes of making some kind of mental picture or comparison, something you can relate to, right? And that's how we describe things to people. Anything I would describe to you, if you don't know what it is, that's exactly how I'd do it, right? I would make a comparison to something you do know. That's how God explains how we can relate to himself. There is no other being in the universe like God is. And so what he does is he says, well, our relationship in some ways is like this, or our relationship is like this, something you can relate to and understand. And some of the illustrations or comparisons he makes are these. The first one is God, the creator and the creation. We're going to cover that in a little bit. Enemies. We all know what enemies are, do we not? I think we've all maybe had one in the past, hopefully, unfortunately. Not hopefully, sorry, unfortunately, probably and unfortunately. But we know what enemies are. And God says, in a certain state, left to yourself in your rebellion, we are like enemies. That's the relationship between us, because you're in rebellion against me. I'm holy and you're wicked, and you've turned away from me, and you've said, I don't want anything to do with you. The problem is I'm holy and you are not, and I have to punish sin. And so until something happens there, you and I are enemies. I am against you. And since we know what enemies are, now we can understand maybe a little bit of the relationship between ourselves and God if we find ourselves in rebellion against him. How about master to servant? A number of different places in the Bible, God describes us or his people as servants. In our day and age in America, we're a little disadvantaged to this, right? We don't really have masters and servants in our culture. Most cultures throughout man's history have had masters and servants. They'd pick up on this really well. Again, all men are created equal and stuff like that in our day and age in our country. We're not as familiar with this, but the master is the one who gives the orders, and the servant is the one who carries them out, right? The master is the boss, the servant is the servant, and he does stuff for the master. And so God describes the relationship between ourselves and him as master and servant. He, of course, being the master and we being the servant. He calls the shots. We are to obey and carry out his plan and his will. How about friends? Wow, friends. We all know what friends are. We have human friends. We look out for each other. We want to spend time with each other. We want what is best for the other, right? If you have a friend, hopefully you want what is best for them, and hopefully they want what is best for you. Again, God describes our relationship to him. Again, this is not talking about people in rebellion. He's talking about people who have come to him, repented, who have accepted his sacrifice for salvation, had their sins forgiven, their relationships is restored. And he describes a relationship with those people as being friends. That's a huge step from being somebody who I can barely comprehend relating to. Now, by this point, we are calling friend. We're saying we're friends. How about brothers? That's maybe even a step closer than friend. That's a very close relational, I would say intimate relationship, right? Where you know each other really, really well. You're part of the same family now. And God says, you people, you all know what siblings are, brothers, sisters, you know what that's like. And that's what we can be like, you and I. He says, we can be that close. We can be as close as a brother, as a sibling. How about father to child? Again, we all have parents. We know what that's like. You've had parents, and many of you have been parents. And so you know what that relationship is like, how close and nurturing it is, how you care for the child as a parent, as you care for the child. And how as a child you look up to the parent, and they're just the greatest thing ever, at least as you're really small. That changes as you get in your teens and stuff. But you look to the parent as providing for your needs and just knowing everything. You just sit there, oh, it's mommy, oh, it's daddy, hooray! right? The little kid that comes running to the door every time you walk in. And God describes our relationship as being like a parent to a child, because we all know what that's like. The lesson I've put up here is that of marriage, husband and wife. You cannot get much closer than that. And perhaps this is one of the most common illustrations of the relationship that we can have with God is being spousal, married, joined together, right? We as a church, and throughout the Old Testament, God in Israel, or God in the church in the New Testament. Not that the one replaces the other, we just keep that straight. But in terms of the relationship itself, that close and that intimate and that committed and that eternal of a relationship is how God describes how we can relate to Him. Can you imagine that? The creator of the universe, the all-knowing, the omnipotent, the eternal, says that I see you as my bride. That is mind-blowing. And if He hadn't told us that that's how it could be, I would never believe it. I just never would. I'd be like the deist guy who says, nah, there's no way. There's no way that can be. And yet He says it is. He says it is, and that's how we can relate to Him. Now you might notice I've put these illustrations, these relationships up on the slide in a certain order, at least the best that I kind of could. It goes from, can I say, the least close and the least intimate down to the most, top to bottom. I've kind of tried to make it progressive that way. And these are the 7 topics that we're going to cover this quarter throughout the Sunday schools. I'd like to kind of take these in order, look at each one, give each one its own time, look at some passages and references for each one. And again, I'd like to start from if you call it the most distant, I guess, the top one, the God and the Creator, down all the way at the end of the quarter, down to the bottom one, the marriage one, the closest and the most intimate. Again, if you're watching this online, I'll have to apologize because you won't get to hear the rest of this quarter unless you show up in person and come up to room 400. If you stay home, that's fine too. Jim will have a fine series on 1 Corinthians. But in our remaining time, I'd like to at least introduce and begin on this first topic here, God and the Creator to His creation. That's the first level, the most base level of relationship that we can have with Him. And it might almost seem strange to start there. We just got done kind of denouncing Deism as being incomplete, logical but incomplete, because God tells us we can be so much more than that. And yet this is where we start. We're almost back to that level. But I think that especially in our, and I'll use this term loosely, Christian culture, which we all know it is not anymore, if it ever was, but in our religious culture, we've become very familiar and very casual about God and Jesus and who He is, right? Not everybody, but so many people go to church, many people worship in their own way, they have their own practices, their beliefs, but Christianity in our country anyway is very cheap. That's not the way it is all over the world. In many places the world is very costly. It'll cost you your family, your possessions, possibly your life. Here in the States, Christianity is cheap. You can believe whatever you want, and that's fine. Nobody will bother you about it. They might laugh at you behind your back a little bit, maybe, but you're not going to be arrested. You're not going to be thrown in prison. You're not going to be tortured. You're not going to lose anything. And a result of that, it can become very flippant and superficial, right? By the way, just for fun, I threw in a little picture. You all recognize this as being at least a rendition, our thoughts of what our galaxy looks like. You see that little notation that says, we are here. That little teeny pixel dot right there in one of the armbands of our spiral galaxy of the Milky Way. Of course, ours is just one of millions, if not billions, of galaxies that God created, and we're a little tiny speck on a little tiny speck on a little tiny speck on a mud ball that's called Earth in that galaxy there. And so from that perspective, we can kind of understand maybe how small we are. Some of us have been to the Creation Museum down in Kentucky, and one of my favorite parts there, it's been a number of years since I've been there, but what do they call it, the movie thing where you lay back and watch the movie on the ceiling. Planetarium, thank you, yeah, because it talks about planets, right? Yeah, good call, planetarium. And you sit in these comfy little seats, and you lean back, and the video is showing on this curved, domey ceiling thing. And my favorite part is when it's trying to give you some perspective of how small we are, right? And it kind of zooms you out like you're in a spaceship, and it looks back on Earth, and Earth is getting smaller and smaller, and all of a sudden you see this thing kind of whiz by, and it's the moon, right? This big white ball. And you keep on going, the ball gets smaller, and Earth is getting smaller, and then you go past another couple balls, and they're Mars and Jupiter and Saturn and all those things. You keep on going, and there's a narration going about how far and kind of giving you some kind of perspective. And as I recall, it's been a number of years, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, all of a sudden you see this kind of illustrated green square, rectangle box that you almost fly through. And he said, and the narration says, now this is kind of tried to give you an idea of perspective of how far you are. And I don't remember exactly how they're all defined, but you fly through one green box and you see our solar system and everything gets smaller and smaller until you can hardly see it. And then other stars come in the picture, and you fly through another green box. And it says, now each one of these green boxes represents what he said is a logarithmic scale of distance. That is, each one you go through is 10 times further than the one you just went through. So in other words, to put in simple numerical terms, if the first one is 1 mile out, the next box, although it looks the same, is really 10 miles out. And the next box, although it looks the same, is actually 100 miles out. And the next one's 1,000, the next one 10,000. So each one is a factor of 10 more. And so you fly through box after box after box. And the first one is hugely far, and the next one is 10 times that, next one's 10 times that, until you're just so immensely far out. And then the camera spins around and says, now, this far out, you look at the constellations that God created in the universe. And from Earth, it looks like such and such picture you're used to, the Big Dipper and all the other constellations. But out here, you can see that they're very different. And it turns the camera, and everything's distorted, and it kind of distorts out how it would look out there. And the camera keeps going back and back. And you realize, wow, we are really, 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 really tiny. We are really tiny people. We think it's a big deal to go to the moon. The moon is the very closest sizable rock that orbits our little teeny planet in our teeny solar system, in our teeny, part of the galaxy. We think it's an even bigger deal to send a guy to Mars, right? Mars would take several months to get to. A couple years they were talking about a manned mission to Mars. I don't know if they're still talking about that or not. The problem is it takes so long to get there, it would be a one-way trip for whoever goes. I mean, it's kind of funny, but it's kind of not. If you go on that, it's a suicide mission, right? Just for the privilege of being the first guy to stand on a different planet. Because it takes so long, it takes so much resources, energy, and fuel to get there, they cannot bring you back. You will die there. And we think that's a big deal, and it kind of is. I mean, it's technologically really cool, but that is the very next planet within our same solar system. That's not even getting to the very next closest star. We have no hopes and dreams of getting to the next star. It'd take way too long. Our big thing is getting to the very next planet. I'm saying all this not for an astronomy lesson, but just to try to give us a picture of how small we are and how amazing of a feat it is that the creator of all this, who just spoke it into existence like it was nothing, has any interest in us at all. Now, I want to show you next a picture, and I want you to think about this picture long and hard. Think about what it means. I don't really like this picture. I'm not endorsing this picture, just so you understand. But I want you to see and think about this picture. Here we go. You ready? Look at the picture. What do you think? This is obviously a cartoonish, a drawing illustration of Jesus, right? And what is he doing? What is he saying? What's the expression tell you of what he's doing? Now you can kind of see what he's doing, right? He's giving the thumbs up with one hand, and the other hand is kind of out of the picture, but he's kind of going, yeah, like that, right? What do you think? What is this saying about who Jesus and who God is? Well, it's a very, can I use the word casual? A very casual relationship. Kind of, I don't know if superficial is the right word necessarily, but a flippant maybe. I'm trying to imagine when Jesus was actually on earth. If he walked around with his disciples and he'd somebody on the street and he'd go, yeah. Do you think he would? Now, I'm not saying that Jesus never smiled or that he never told a joke. Wouldn't it be fun to know what jokes Jesus told when he was on earth? I mean, just out of your own curiosity, wouldn't that be fun? We think of Jesus as a somber and, always giving these great oratory speeches and lessons and principles, which he did. But he had a personality too. He was every bit as human as we are. I would guess he told jokes sometimes, maybe. I mean, I don't want to say he has no sense of humor. I'm not trying to portray that. But if this is your idea of Jesus, just a casual guy that you're going to walk around and come up to and say, hey, yo, Jesus, how's it going today? I think maybe you don't understand really who Jesus is. Because when I see people, especially in his glorified state, I'm thinking Revelations now, and they meet Jesus, they're not going, hey, how are ya? Let's hang out together tonight. Hot dogs at my place. They are usually sniffing gold dust through their nose because their faces are flat on the ground in God's streets of heaven because they're laying down worshiping him on the throne, right? That's usually where they are. It's awe, it's reverence, it's respect, it's fear. It's not this guy right here. And again, I'm not saying that we can't be close to Jesus, but it's not this guy. So I'm going to put an X on this picture if that's okay with you, because I think that's a pretty poor picture of the sovereign master of the universe. In studying how God has reached down to relate to us and have a relationship with us on a personal level, it's easy to forget the most fundamental relationship between us. He is the all-powerful creator God, and we are the little tiny creatures. Yes, he is our friend, but we are not, and we never will be, equal peers with him. Simply by virtue of who he is, he will always deserve and demand our worship, our fear, and our submission. This is why I wanted to start with God as the creator first, because I don't want to study all the close, intimate relationships that he describes with us and have us lose grasp of who he is. I was going to say this later on, but I guess some of you won't be there, so I'll say it now. Most of the other relationships that we will discover and talk about and discuss throughout the quarter are because of what he's done for us, right? He would never be our friend if it weren't for what he's done for us to save us, or our brother, or the marriage relationship. All those are because of what he has done for us. This relationship here, God and creator to creation, is simply by virtue of who he is and who we are. Nothing else. I mean, he is by his nature the all-powerful, omniscient, all-knowing, eternal, all-everything God, and we are the little people. And if we become so casual and flippant and comfortable that we forget that, we've got a problem. We have to hold one without losing grasp of the other, right? We have to remember that we can be close and intimate with him and still not forget that awe and respect that he demands and deserves. And again, that's why I wanted to cover this one first. Just a couple aspects of this, and I'm going to, for this morning, before we close out, I think we have time, give just a single passage about a number of different facets that I came across, and we're going to develop these more so next week, probably up in room 400, unless I end up down here again. Jim, I hope you get better. But think about his power, for example. God talks about his power, his overwhelming power. We as people think we're powerful creatures. We are not. We think we're powerful creatures because we've never encountered visibly and physically God and seen his power. I mean, we see what he's done, but he's never shown up in all of his glory, right? Think of the Israelites at Mount Sinai, right? They hear God's voice and they're just shaking in their boots and they're crawling under rocks to hide. Or think about the Mount of Transfiguration, right? God reveals his majesty, and the three disciples are just, they don't know what to do. They're beside themselves. It's too overwhelming. His power. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 32 through 36 says, "For ask now of the days that are past, which were before you, since the day that God created man on the earth, and ask from one end of the heaven to the other, whether such a great thing as this has ever happened or is ever heard of." He said, talk to anybody you can, read any history book you can find, see if you can find any other God that's done anything close to what I have done for you. Again, he's speaking to the Israelites, right? This is after he's taken them out of Egypt. He's shown them all the 10 plagues of Egypt. He's decimated Egypt, the superpower nation of the day. He's reduced them to nothing, to a dirt pit. He's taken them out as slaves. He's walked them through the Red Sea, single-handedly destroyed the greatest army of Egypt in the world at that time, reduced them to nothing, to fish food. He's led them through the wilderness to Mount Sinai. He's spoken to them from the mountain, thunderous voice, smoke, clouds, awe, majesty, power. He's walked them through the wilderness. He's shown them the land that he would promise them. The people rejected. They said, no, it's too scary for us. So he said, fine, you're going to wander around in the wilderness till you die. So he's walked around in the wilderness, but all the meantime, he's protected them. He's defeated other kings and armies to keep them safe. He's fed them manna. He's given them water, everything he can to show them his power. They've seen his power more times than they can count. And so he says, you talk to anybody you want. Talk to any foreigner, any stranger as we're walking by in the wilderness. Read any book you want to. Has any God ever done anything anywhere close to what I have done for you? Rhetorical question. The answer is no, nobody has. Verse 33 continues, did any people ever hear of a voice of God speaking out of the midst of the fire as you have heard and still live? Think Mount Sinai there. Or has any God ever attempted to go and take a nation for himself from the midst of another nation, by trials, by signs, by wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and by great deeds of terror, all of which the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? Did any of the Egyptian gods ever do anything like that? Did any of the Egyptian gods try to stop me as I walked you out of Egypt as a bunch of ragtag slaves, taking all of Egypt's treasures and gold with you? Did any of their gods try to stop me? No, because they're not gods, that's why. There is no other God. Verse 35, to you it was shown that you might know that the Lord is God. There is no other besides him. Out of heaven he let you hear his voice, that he might discipline you. And on earth he let you see his great fire, and you heard his words out of the midst of the fire. He's showing the people, he's reminding them his power and his majesty. He says, above all else, I am the God. There is no other God but me. Nobody can compete with me. Nobody comes even close to competing with me. I am the Lord your God. Do not forget it. Sadly, of course, we know that they forgot it. And so do we oftentimes, do we not? Yeah, we get caught up with the mundane silliness of life, and we tend to forget. How about his holiness? This is out of Numbers chapter 16, verse 22. It said, and they fell on their faces and said, O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and will you be angry with the whole congregation? This is talking about, well, the Israelites were walking around the wilderness, and there was another rebellion. And one guy sinned, and they said, oh, was this in Korah? I forget exactly where this comes from. But they're concerned about his holiness because sin is introduced into the relationship, and everybody knows what that means. Oh, please, God, have mercy on us. We know you are holy. We know you cannot tolerate sin. We know you're going to punish it. Please have mercy on us. The creator-creation relationship where there's holiness involved, and we realize that we are not holy. And God's not going to tolerate anything that's not holy, which means bad news for us, unless he shows a lot of mercy and patience and forgiveness with us. Okay? How about the one and only God? Psalm 86, verses 8 through 13. There is none like you among the gods, O Lord, nor are there any works like yours. All the nations you have made shall come and worship before you, O Lord, and shall glorify your name. For you are great and do wondrous things. You alone are God. Teach me your way, O Lord, that I may walk in your truth. Unite my heart to fear your name. I give thanks to you, O Lord my God, with my whole heart, and I will glorify your name forever. For great is your steadfast love towards me. You have delivered my soul from the depths of Sheol, from the grave, from death. You are the only God there is. I will praise you, I'll glorify you, I'll remember that you are the only one, because you are the only one. Everything else that they call a God is not a God. It's fake, it's wood, it's stone, it's metal, it's something, but it's something that somebody's dreamed up, and they've decided to worship it. You are the one and only God who is real and who can do amazing things. Authority. Jeremiah 27, 4 through 7 says, give them this charge for their masters. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel. And this is what you shall say to your masters. By the way, masters, this is when they are exiled and they're living under the rule of somebody else. That's what he's talking about here. He said, it is I who by my great power and my outstretched arm have made the earth, with men and animals that are on the earth, and I give it to whoever seems right to me. Now I have given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and I have given him also the beasts of the field to serve him. Boy, there's a lot of fun stuff to look at in those couple verses, isn't there? By the way, I'm going to get sidetracked. Verse 7, all the nations shall serve him and his son and his grandson until the time of his own land comes. Then many nations and great kings shall make him their slave. In this passage, who is calling the shots? Clearly, it is God himself. And God says, look, I gave you over to Nebuchadnezzar. He is going to rule over you. Okay? He will be the boss. He is my, did you see what it calls him there? He says, he is my servant. This is a guy who didn't even worship God himself. God can use whoever he wants to for a servant. People say you have to be following God to serve him and to be his servant. And I hope you are following him, because it'll be much better for you. But God can choose to use whoever he wants, whether they follow him or not. Man's wrath works God's will, right? Is what they say. So he says, Nebuchadnezzar is my servant because he's going to carry out my will, and my will is to punish you for turning away from me. And you're to serve him. However, I'm the one who gave him the power that he has. I'm giving him all his military success. Did you catch that other thing? In verse, here we go, verse 6, the last part of verse 6. I have even given him also the beasts of the field to serve him. I think NIV says the wild animals. Well, he's even over control of the wild animals is how NIV translates it. Wouldn't you love to know what that looks like? What in the world kind of special powers and abilities did God give Nebuchadnezzar at this time to do what he was to do? Unbelievable. That would have been really cool to kind of see. Not to be the victim of, but at least to see it. But God says, I'm the one that gives him all these powers. And you're going to serve him and his son and his grandson until what? Until I decide that his time has come, and then somebody else is going to take him over, and then he's going to be somebody else's slave. But I'm the one who calls these shots. I'm giving him power now, and then eventually I'm going to take it away, and I'm going to give it to somebody else to punish him. Then I'm going to give it to somebody else to punish him. Then I'm going to give it to somebody else to punish him. But I'm always in control. I'm always calling the shots because I am the sovereign God of the universe, and I make those decisions, not you. So when you get to Babylon, and they say, hey, what are you here for? Well, we're from Israel, and we rebelled against God, and so he sent us here. But we serve the God that kind of controls everything that's going on here, and for right now, he's giving you the victory, but that's not always going to be the case. That's what God says. And it was true, and everything happened just the way he said it would. One more, I know we're almost out of time. Creator, Acts 17. The God who made the world and everything in it, being the Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way towards him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. This is exactly what we're talking about in this lesson here. We could keep going. We're going to stop for now, but I hope you get a feel for the magnificence and the amazingness of God. And while we can and should try to be close to him in a very personal way, we must not forget who he is by his nature and who we are by our nature. We are small and he is mighty, and he deserves fear and worship and praise and adoration.